Okay, so it's 11:05 and we will begin our program. Okay. Hello everyone, my name is Natalie Gabriel and I would like to welcome you to the Winter 2021 George E. Danis Eastern Mediterranean Security and Diplomacy Seminar, the EC Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies in cooperation with Constantine G. Karamanlis Chair at the Fletcher School, the Fletcher Initiative on Religion, Law, and Diplomacy, the Department of International Relations at the National University of Political Studies, Public Administration in Romania, and the Institute of International Relations in Athens will be hosting a one-week program of focused lectures, presentations, and panel discussions. The one-week program will bring experts from different regions in 3 sets of presentations and panel discussions aimed at assessing a changing America and a dynamic Eastern Mediterranean. The seminar will address the multifaceted intersectional issues that explain the significance of Eastern Mediterranean in regional, trans-regional, and global terms by considering issues such as climate change, migration, energy resources and security, religio-cultural identities and soft power, public health pandemics, and inter- and interstate relations, with country experts from cases across the Mediterranean basin, the Middle East and the Caucasus, and the transatlantic space. The seminar will introduce students to the historically grounded significance of the Eastern Mediterranean for contemporary US foreign and security policy and for key global trends in the 21st century. Our presenters this week come from the different countries of the region, as well as backgrounds. We have a mixture of policymakers, diplomats, and academics. The full program is available once you register for the conference. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speakers. Our first speaker today is Dr. Gabriel Haritos, who is a postdoctoral.
Second one.
Sorry.
The first is Ambassador Stein.
So our first speaker today is Ambassador Shimon Stein, who is a senior research fellow at the Institute for the National Security Studies. He joined the Institute research staff after a long career in the Foreign Service. He served as Israel ambassador to Germany from 2001 to 2007. Prior to this appointment, he served as head of the Division on Arms Proliferation, Arms Control, Disarmament, and Regional Security, and served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as Deputy Director General for the CIS, as well as Eastern and Central Europe. Ambassador Stein held additional MFA posts in Washington, Germany, and Israel, and was a member of Israel's delegation to multilateral negotiations on arms control. And Ambassador Stein is currently in international consulting. And our second speaker of the day is Dr. Gabriel Haritos, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Israeli Center for Israel Studies at the Ben-Gurion Research Institute at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. He teaches history of the political relations between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece at the Israel Studies program and the Department of History and Archaeology at the University of Cyprus. And I'd like to also introduce our facilitator today, Dr. Vamvakas, who is the director of the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies at Emmanuel College. Before turning the microphone to our speaker, I wanted to let you know that I will act as the host of the event and will guide the Q&A, which will follow the 45-minute presentation. The duration of our program will be 1 hour and 30 minutes. I'd like to ask you to turn off your microphones and to use either the chat or to raise your hand for any questions. We will try to answer all of the questions. It is nice to have you all here, and thank you for being with us today. Ambassador Stein, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you for the nice introduction. My mother would have loved to hear how nice her son did for such a long time. I am glad to have the opportunity to spend the coming 90 minutes or so with you. The topic that I was asked to discuss with you, and I have more or less 20 minutes to cover, is to assess the Abraham Accords in light of a new administration. I understand that that topic is in the context of the theme of the seminar, Changing America in a Dynamic Eastern Mediterranean. However, I'll be brief in covering, first of all, the broader international picture of 20 and look a bit into 21. Then I refer briefly to your topic overall, the changing America, and move also briefly to discuss the Middle East and the Abraham Accord, and perhaps if time will allow, and if not, during the Q&A, I will also make a brief comment regarding the Eastern Mediterranean, but that would be also a subject for Dr. Haritos also to cover. So broadly speaking about the international system, I think that the pandemic started at the end of a decade that has been characterized by a growing global power competition in a globalization that had blurred the physical borders among countries, and with the technological information revolution that had changed the world that we use to know. The pandemic has exposed current trends, but also created new ones, and had kind of compelled all the international players to kind of organize themselves with respect to the ramification, which has broadly created some havoc worldwide. The international system has been in the pandemic year and even earlier to be polarized, highly polarized, where the main players devoted most of their time to domestic affairs, first and foremost in a mode of crisis management that focused on not only on the health issue, but also economically and socially, each and every country in its own way. The economic crisis was characterized by a kind of growing differentiation. It has impacted the West more than the East, and the West, I mean the US and Europe more than the East, and in this respect, China and East Asia. And there are also some differences within each and every economy, which was more or less impacted. But the main driver was clearly the technology. As we look into 2021, we assume that the coming year, in fact, the year that we have now started, would be in a state first and foremost in the process of trying to recover gradually from the pandemic and all its ramifications. The global world will be continue to function against that backdrop because it will take a very long time for to get the so-called herd immunity. We believe that the great global power competition will still be a dominant factor with the incoming Biden administration. Will try and regroup, and I'll talk about it in a second. But the assumption is that he will be focusing first and foremost on domestic affairs to cure America, so to speak. And we would also expect the US to once again, after the American first phase post-Trump, to once again reassert the US leadership at the helm of the democratic liberal order that has lost a bit of its prestige because of the US. And also we would see some changes with respect to the Middle East. I'll come to it in a minute. China as we have seen, has been doing some, had taken the corona as a national challenge, and has been able to cope with it in its own way, and the system clearly helped China to combat the epidemic, and we also already see the economic recovery with quite enviable growth rates compared with the US and Europe, and also that will help China once continue its positioning as a global power. Russia will continue to cope with internal problems, and it's also international stature, using its cyber intelligence and abilities, which you and the US have been a witness of, and might also get closer to China vis-a-vis the US. Europe is clearly find itself in a political and ideological crisis. Will try and revive the transatlantic partnership. Clearly, it seems that the Middle East will not dominate the global agenda unless there is a major war or some escalation, with the exception of the Iranian nuclear issue, which will clearly dominate the agenda of the incoming US administration as a distraction from the issues that the Biden administration would want to focus, but that is an issue which is pressing and needs a solution. We can also discuss it briefly during the Q&A. With the general tendency, as Obama has started it, the pivoting from Europe to the East trend that will continue. We will also see what we have seen at the beginning of the pandemic, the national state trying to take leadership and try and cope with the pandemic at the expense of multilateral efforts. But I mean, as part of the whole way of coping, we have witnessed the kind of decrease and decline of in the Western world of some freedoms, individual freedoms and otherwise. We might see a world that is less free that we used to hear, with some growing role of state organs, more penetrating world that will be less prosperous as we have known it before. With the driving of the digital based on technology, which would become a huge driver and will have an impact on all walks of life. So that is kind of very brief description of the global scene, the way I see it. Speaking about your topic, changing America, indeed, America will have to, first of all, recover from one of the darkest moments in its history last week. That will take a huge effort, which will not end with the Biden 4-year terms. That is a generational challenge, and all of those who care about the US as a leading democracy will hope that the US society will find its sources and try and begin to overcome the huge polarization and the dysfunctionality that we have seen in the last 4 years. We, I guess, will not see only a change, we will see also continuity on some of the issues that we have seen, for example, starting already with the Obama and going into the Trump, and that is a bit of a withdrawal from the Middle East, the way the US used to, a kind of retrenchment that will have impact, that has already impacted the Middle East, and I'll come to it in a second. So I guess we will see changes with respect to the transatlantic relation, less so with respect to China, though China will be a major issue for the transatlantic alliance as such in years to come, will be quite interesting to watch. When I speak about the Trump era, and especially about Israel, the country that I'm coming from, I think that many countries and many societies are relieved to see Trump gone. That is not the case with Israel, who has benefited a lot from the Trump era on some issues that have to do with the recognition of Jerusalem as our capital, moving the US embassy to Jerusalem, legitimizing settlements, and of course withdrawing from the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, with respect to Iran, something that Israel and primarily the Prime Minister was an advocate of that, and also with respect to some events in the Middle East that I will refer to in a second. So Israel is looking a bit, I would say, concerned about the incoming administration. Our Prime Minister's approach towards the Iranian issue and to Trump has turned Israel into a partisan issue in the United States, from a mode of Israel as a bipartisan issue. So it will take some time to rebuild trust. We know that Biden's approach to Israel is fundamentally very positive, has been so throughout his 40 years political engagement on the Hill and otherwise. So we will have some work to do. When I speak about Trump and how good he was to Israel from the viewpoint of some, I do not share that view entirely, but that's a different issue. I think that the move, namely the Abraham Accords, have to be seen in a broader context of the Middle East. As you know, the so-called Arab Spring started 10 years ago. The Arab world has not recovered yet, and will take a very long time to simply move on the way to modernization, reforms, all things that have been lagging behind in the Middle East. There are countries that are still in the midst of civil wars, dysfunctionality, economic backwardness, lack of technological improvement. So the Arab world is in a much worse situation than it was ever before. Powers outside the region are trying to dominate the region, and that is first and foremost Iran and Turkey. There are also extra-regional, of course, that takes an interest, being the US in a withdrawal mood, Russia, who is going into vacuums that it can recognize, and it has been quite successful, and China, that is primarily at this stage interested more in economic rather than in taking political responsibility in the region. So against that context, there has been some changes. Arab countries, there is no longer the Arab solidarity, the Arab unanimity. Each country looks after its own interests, with also some big camps, the so-called Sunni moderates, the jihadists, the Shiites. We don't have time to go into it, but the driving motto is countries are looking for their own national interest. And in that context, one has to see also the Abraham Accords that probably comes against the backdrop of US Trump in the winding day of his administration, trying to see if there is something that the US can do. Not only that, I mean, there was also other elements. One of them is the Iranian threat that has been looming large, and many countries in the Middle East have looked at it, especially Gulf countries, asking them what does it mean for us and what measures do we take in order to protect our national interest. With the Emiratis, of course, an issue that was highlighted in the news was an arms deal, and especially the aircraft F-35 that were of great interest. So I would say, without going now into details, Mr. Haritos probably might refer to it, it's a combination that has brought the Emirates to start the overt process of normalization, because relationship between Israel and some Gulf states have been going for many years, but they have now become openly, and that is in itself quite an important aspect, especially for Israel in the context of its Palestinian-Israeli, Arab-Israeli conflict, where for decades a precondition for normalizing the relation between Israel and its Arab neighbors was progress on the Palestinian issue, preferably moving towards a political solution in the form of two states for two people. But now with the Emirati revoking that Palestinian veto, Arab states might follow, while not forgetting the Palestinian issue, but clearly putting it not as a priority item, because, as I said earlier, what they do care about is their own national interest. Many of them see the advantages of reaching out to Israel as a powerhouse technologically, military-wise, and we will see what happens, as you know, after the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco have followed suit, and we are all waiting for the icing of the cake for Saudi Arabia to join the ranks. I am a bit reticent about it. I don't see that happening anytime soon, but we have something that we have to look forward. So that's briefly to the Abraham Accord from Israeli point of view, a recognition that we are an integral part of the region. Moving quickly and finally to the Eastern Mediterranean. After all, it is a sub-region in a much broader issue, but it is a highly complex issue, quite interesting for students of international relations to study. I guess what made that issue in recent years so attractive was the enormous resources of gas that was found in the Mediterranean, which kind of brought to the fore the latent and not latent conflict between Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus, and then the Libya civil war with proxies involved there, Turkey, Russia, and what have you. But to end on a positive side, for Israel, who consider itself also to be the Mediterranean country, not only, I guess we have discovered an opportunity not only with the gas exploration and what we have already found, but also for a kind of a revival of relationship with Greece and Turkey, and even more so within the so-called gas forum with Egypt, Jordan, the Palestinians, Italy. So that the Eastern Mediterranean is a region with a lot of potential for regional cooperation, and I think that that would be quite a promising area to work out in coming years. I think that Turkey remains a problem for all of us, but I believe, and that might be a bit controversial, that Turkey is much of a problem, it is also part of the solution. And you cannot have a regional interaction without engaging Turkey in one way or the other. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Stein, for this informative presentation. And Dr. Haritos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm happy to see you all here. I could not, the first thing that crossed my mind when I heard about the Accords, Abraham Accords, on the 13th of August, which was also my birthday, and I heard about that Israel and the UAE are signing their agreement, or they were about to sign an agreement on the 13th of August. It was the declaration made by the joint declaration from the US, Israel, and the UAE. The first thing that crossed my mind, and I am going to quote some words from the autobiography of Golda Meir when she was at the UN in November 1956 after the Suez crisis, and she wrote, when she saw what was the climate in the UN, "We are without family. No one shares a religion, a language, or common past with us. All other nations in the world are grouped together based on their geography or their history and have established common interests for their peoples. Our neighbors, however, and therefore our natural allies, do not want any contact with us. And in reality, we do not belong anywhere or to anyone other than ourselves." This was in November 1956. That Golda Meir wrote, and it was the truth. It was the way Israel was looking around, looking at their neighbors and the region that Israel was then. If Golda Meir would wake up in 2021 and listens to the news, she would be very surprised, and she would see that the reality has changed a lot. But, and I think that Professor Vamvakas and Arvanitopoulos, who are also Greeks, I am also Greek, this kind of feeling was felt in Greece and Cyprus in the 50s, when the Cold War was there, in the 60s, after the independence of Cyprus, and the intercommunity between the riots between Greeks and Turks in Cyprus, when Turkey invaded in 1974, and Greece and the Greek diplomacy was watching around, reaching for friends and not seeing them anywhere, and also the way that Greeks felt during the economic crisis these last 10 years. So once we see now the reality in the region, and after the revelation of the gas reserves, and due to that, the new relationship that has been formed during the last 10 years between Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, Greece, Cyprus, Jordan even, and of course with the help of the US, under the umbrella of the US, this was a good surprise that happened to the way that Greece was looking at her environment, and also Cyprus. Greece, until the revelation of the gas reserves in the East Mediterranean, was considering itself as a member of the EU, as a member of NATO, as a Balkan country, but has forgotten that Greece is very near to the Middle East. Cyprus, on the other hand, especially after the invasion in 1974, was waiting for something good to come from Athens, from London, and from the UN. And suddenly, and the Cypriots and the Greeks have realized that both their countries do belong also in the Middle East. And especially Cyprus was surprised to see that the Republic of Cyprus is a Middle Eastern state. But when this special relationship started with Israel, there was, in those 10 years, Greeks and Cypriots asked themselves, and in the public sphere, and also in the ministries of foreign affairs, what are we going to do with all these Arab countries that we had very good relations with them? Is this relation going to be damaged now that we have a good relation with Israel? It was a big question mark, and we saw that the media in both countries, in Greece and Cyprus, were reluctant and did not want to touch this issue. Of course, Israel, from 1956, when Golda Meir told what I read, she has signed peace agreements with Egypt and with Jordan, and of course, the Oslo Accords opened a new era between Israel and the Arab world. Then we have the second Intifada, and what we have now is a situation that is not normal vis-a-vis the Palestinians or those in the West Bank and those in Gaza. The Abraham Accords gave a good, let's say, alibi for the Greek and the Cypriot points of view, how they view themselves within the Middle Eastern scene, how they can legitimize their friendship with Israel. And this is why Greece and Cyprus are really very, very happy of what has happened during the Trump administration. I know that in the States, Donald Trump has done things that have polarized your society in the States, but I have to admit that what has happened during the Trump administration, and if we remember what happened in the Middle East and in the relationship between the States and Israel and their allies in the Middle East, under Barack Obama, I think that what has been done by Trump and Kushner has been very helpful in order to promote a dialogue between Israel and the Arabs. So under this point of view, Greece and Cyprus are very happy about what has happened since August 13, and they can see themselves within the new environment that is formed throughout these 6 months, and we are going to see even more. Now, how do the Abraham Accords might give new possibilities for the cooperation between the Hellenic factor, Greece and Cyprus, and Israel. Before answering this question, answering this subject, I would like to remind you how Israel helped itself through its friendship, through its cooperation with Israel and Cyprus. The European Union, Greece and Cyprus are members of the European Union, and the European Union has been critical toward Israel about the Palestinian issue, about the way Israel treats the Oslo agreements and its commitments toward the Palestinians and the Quartet. So the Europeans have been critical about the Israeli side. With the revelation of the gas reserves, we see that the European Union is interested to become a partner in the field of energy with Israel through Greece and Cyprus. If we see it on the other way, we see that Greece and Cyprus during the last 10 years have been one of the most friendly voices within the EU. It is not only that. Israel has succeeded to come together also with other EU countries through Greece and Cyprus, let's say the V4 countries. We saw also that Prime Minister Netanyahu was invited in a summit about energy in the Balkans 2 years ago, when the Syriza government in Greece was in power. And we see that Israel has helped its image and helped its relation toward a Europe which was until now somehow more reluctant and critical toward the Israeli policy and positions. What now is Greece and Cyprus could do, following this example that Israel has done during the 10 years, is to find a way in order to promote the Hellenic factor and the Hellenic interests, Hellenic, I mean Greek and Cypriot, with third countries that are connected with Israel now, about which in Greece and in Cyprus we heard little about until lately. Who could have imagined that these two, that the UAE would sign a military agreement with Greece? Who would imagine to see UAE aircrafts in Crete doing common exercises with the Greek Air Force or with the National Guard of Cyprus? It could not have been a reality without the Abraham Accords. On the other, that's the good point of what has happened after the Abraham Accords. A bad paradigm is what Greece hasn't done in order to exploit and promote itself in a region that Greece has abandoned for many decades. That's Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. We saw that in December 2018, Israel and Chad, the president of Chad has visited here in Jerusalem the Israeli Prime Minister, and we see that Greece and Chad have somehow opened their channels of communication. I have to remind you the map. Chad, the northern borders of Chad are with Libya, and Libya now has a civil war. There is a past between Greece and Libya during the 80s that we should not forget. Greece was in a position to fear that the regime of Muammar Gaddafi would recognize the illegal entity that Turkey has established in the occupied parts of Cyprus. Why? Because in 1974, when Turkey invaded Cyprus, the regime of Muammar Gaddafi was the only country that congratulated Turkey for its invasion. Why? Because Libya wanted to legitimize its invasion to northern Chad in order to protect the uranium fields, but also the Muslim and Arab minority in Chad. This should, what has happened in 2018 when Israel started to talk again with Chad, Greece should think that through Israel, it was the right time for Greece to get interested in what is going in sub-Saharan Africa, Chad, and what was going on in Libya, in order to see and foresee what was going to happen between Libya, the legal and recognized government of Libya, with Turkey. I remind you the agreement signed by the government of Libya with Turkey on the EEZ, which tried and wants to annulate all the agreements on EEZ and maritime zones between Israel, Cyprus, Egypt, and Greece and Egypt for a certain part of the EEZ that Greece wants to declare. In case that was a lesson for the Greek diplomacy, Greece has lost an opportunity to promote its interests through the regional ties that Greece, Cyprus, and Israel have, in order to foresee and prevent such actions made by regional players who do not like to see the new division of the eastern part of the Mediterranean. Did Greece learn something from this thing? I think yes. We have to remember a small detail in the news. The Greek Minister of Foreign Affairs has announced that a month or month and a half ago, that Greece is going to open an embassy in Senegal. Why Senegal? Senegal, I have to remind you that in the illegal entity of the northern part of Cyprus, many students of with West African citizenship are there and have a big percentage of the population, the occupied lands of Cyprus, are of West African origin. Because Turkey sees itself isolated in the new situation that is going to be built in the eastern part of the Mediterranean, promotes the idea of legalizing its illegal entity in the northern part of Cyprus by encouraging third countries that have no relation whatsoever or interest whatsoever what's going on in Cyprus to recognize this entity. And Turkey is present in the western part of Africa as well as the eastern part of Africa. Greece, by its decision, late decision, has decided to start to create a presence in Africa, and it was about time to come this time. I don't know if it is too late, but it is a sign that Greece is starting to understand how they can promote Greek interests through the ties with Israel and through Israeli regional new foreign policy concerning Africa, concerning the Gulf, concerning India. It is not a matter of luck that Greece and the UAE talk to each other, something they did not so far. That Cyprus opened its embassy in Saudi Arabia. Now they are going to open an embassy in Bahrain. I remind that the position of Saudi Arabia on the Cyprus issue was not pro-Greek Cypriot, was pro-Turkish. In the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, even if you read the memoirs of Cypriot diplomats in the 2000, in 2005, 6, we see that the Saudis were not understanding the way that the Greek Cypriots saw the situation in their island. Little by little, this conception that Greece is only a Balkan state, only a EU member state, only a NATO member state, or even Cyprus is only a European state and nothing more than that, it begins to change. And I hope that this that we are going to see more signs in this year, which is very important, and for the Cyprus issue, and for the possibility of an international recognition of the legal entity in the northern part of Cyprus by third countries, which are outside from Africa. I give an example, encouraged by Turkey. And it is the time for Greece and Cyprus to follow the Israeli example on how Israel promoted itself to third countries, to Europe, through its friendship with Athens and Nicosia. This has to happen on the other way around. I hope I think I have concluded my presentation. I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Haritos, for this informative presentation. And I'll remind our participants that they can ask their questions using the Q&A box. And before starting the Q&A portion of our program, I will yield the floor to our facilitator, Dr. Vamvakas.
Yes, thank you very much. Wow, this is a great presentations, and I really appreciate the scope both Ambassador Stein and Dr. Haritos provided for us in bringing us to focus on the Abraham Accords and what it has meant and for the region. And there's a lot to be said, but I see there are some questions. I just I'm going to make my comments fairly brief, and say that from a changing America to the dynamic Eastern Mediterranean, the Abraham Accords seems to be like the focus of it, because if there's one policy that really this Trump administration has really put in the forefront, has been their ability to have transactional kind of foreign policy in a way of getting things done. And President Trump has spent, if there's a Trump doctrine per se, it is this transactional approach. And the showcase piece is the Abraham Accords, the ability to bring the UAE close to Israel, to bypass all kinds of limitations and fears that exist, and so on and so forth. And this architecture moving forward, personally with his son-in-law being involved, and Mr. Pompeo, all the way to the waning days of the administration. I mean, even last week, in the middle of the Capitol assault, the next piece of news was that Israel and Sudan were normalizing relations. I mean, the same day. or that Morocco is still moving forward. So it just seems that this is one of those key policies on the Trump administration, and with the Biden administration coming in and the promise being 180 degrees, no matter what it happened, we're going to turn 180 degrees on, almost like, do away with the Trump years. Even if you look at the selection of people that are staffing key positions in key places in the administration, I wonder what is the life expectancy of the Abraham Accords, and what does that mean then for states like Greece or Cyprus that have really changed foreign policy of decades? Like Greece and Cyprus now have become part of the Arab world, debate. Are you with the UAE, and what does that mean as far as being with the other states? They become part and partisan of the Arab world debates. And the state that we haven't really addressed at all, and almost like an hour of presentation, is Iran, because the whole Abraham Accords was to block Iran, and Iran seems to be the elephant in the room. And we keep looking, west of the East Mediterranean. I really appreciated Dr. Haritos, talking about Africa, and even, the previous speakers have spoken to what extent, or Dr. Erdemir, when he spoke about the blue homeland idea that extends all the way to the eastern shores of the Atlantic, and, having like that kind of a big scope. Those are my comments, and your response, because I don't want to take the time. I see questions on that. Thank you very much, by the way.
Ambassador Stein, do you want to give a response, or
yes,
shall I start?
I will quickly do it, but you can go ahead first, and
Okay.
I will then this time second.
Okay. It is so. About the life expectancy of the Abraham Accords, I don't believe that the new administration, Biden administration, that did not know what was going on when the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, was doing his visits from the 1st of January up until now, or even in December. The Abraham Accords are here to remain, in my opinion. And what I would expect from the Biden administration is to endorse some kind of steps toward the Palestinians by encouraging UAE, the Saudis, the Bahrainis, the Moroccans to bring the Palestinians in a position that they can feel that they can be heard, because Trump administration, while they were planning the Trump plan, peace plan, the vision of peace, and despite the fact that the goal of that plan was to resolve the Palestinian issue, they did not talk with the Palestinians themselves. So it was a common secret that this plan, despite the fact that they said that it was about the Palestinian issue, it was about the normalization and the visibility of the normalization of the relations between Israel and the Saudi factor. This was the goal of the vision of peace of Trump. Now we see that the US are continuing with the Abraham Accords. Biden knows about that, his administration, and when he takes office, then we will see the White House moving towards the Palestinian goals, so that they have to create the right climate so that the Saudis and the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco would tell the Palestinians, come, sit down, let's talk and let's find a solution with the Israelis now that we can talk with the Israelis. And if you do not talk with them, then we can do that for you. This is my estimate of what we can expect when Biden comes into power. About Iran, it's another issue. About Iran, we have a certain point of view that we know from the information that we have about the persons that are going to be on charge in the US, and of course the US will have to have another stance, a more friendly stance towards Iran. The Trump administration has been much too far away from that of any kind of dialogue with Tehran, and also the Iranians did the same.
Thank you, Dr.
Let me briefly respond to the remarks by Dr. Vamvakas. Only in passing, Dr. Haritos, to associate Trump with vision goes a bit too far. I don't know that we can speak about his vision, and if at all, something.
It is the name he gave to the plan.
Yes, I mean, I have some overall difficulties, and anyway, I think that the remark that you have made, Dr. Vamvakas, with respect to transactional as opposed to transformational is a valid one, and I would certainly hope that the accords that have been signed, and I made in passing reference to it in trying to ask ourselves, why did it happen at this juncture, not earlier and not in the future? And it is certainly the accords and the process of normalization has to do also with US domestic politics, with the winding days of Trump, certainly, and therefore to try and disconnect it from the ultimate decision taken by the UAE, I think will be a wrong way of looking at it. Whether that transactional one will lead to a process of normalization with additional states joining, whether that will change the balance of power in the region, has to be seen. Clearly, the UAE will have some problems with the incoming Biden administration. I think that the generous offer of Trump with respect to arms sales will be questions on the heel. Human rights issues will play a role. Yemen, Libya, and some other issues. So I don't expect an easy sale of whatever has been agreed between Trump and the UAE to happen with no problem. But clearly, I see Biden supporting the process that has been launched under Trump. See also the value, the overall value that it will have also to US overall interest in the region. Don't forget that as the US is trying to reduce its profile, they are at the same time are looking for regional partners to take over some of the US responsibilities, and a kind of an alliance or get together of UAE, Israel, informally Saudi Arabia and others is an helpful step towards addressing US national interest in that region. So I would expect continuity on that issue. First of all, and you know, by the way, most of what we deal now internationally is transactional and not transformational at this stage. Most of the things that you see around you are basically of a transactional nature and not of a transformational one. As to Trump and the Palestinians that Dr. Haritos referred to, I consider the Trump so-called deal of the century to be a disaster. Didn't help the overall cause. I could have seen some merit has that been embedded in a strategy, moving the embassy to Jerusalem without something also to the Palestinian, closing down the PLO office in Washington, withdrawing US support for UNRWA, has left the Palestinians with nothing. And I also privately am very critical of the deal itself and what the details, which we cannot go into it. So in this respect, I think that Biden will put that element of the deal of the century and the Trump approach to the Palestinian issue behind himself. What an approach we will see, I guess, resuming a dialogue with the Palestinian Authority, with Abu Mazen, opening again the embassy in the representation in Washington. And from there, we will move on. I mean, the Palestinian-Israeli issue is something that the Israelis now totally ignore. They go about it as if that issue doesn't exist. And I guess the Palestinians have their own share. Dr. Haritos is right in saying that we might hopefully see the Emirati and some others take a more active role in kind of go between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I will certainly be helpful, because that issue will not go away. It will stay with us. And we have to find a way to address it sooner rather than later. And finally, to the elephant in the room, I said early on that the Biden administration is compelled to deal with the issue. It doesn't want to deal because it was not for the Biden issue currently something that he would have loved to go into it, but there is an urgent issue after the Trump decision to withdraw from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in July of 18, and the Iranian move, which are a clear violation of the deal that has been struck. Biden has already stated clearly that the US will get back to that deal, providing that Iran will fulfill its full commitments. And I think that the Prime Minister's attitude, Netanyahu, is a wrong one, and I do not go along with him, because that will again create a confrontation with the Biden administration at the outset, and that is not something that might help us overall reach what the US, Israel, the European Union, Greece, Cyprus, whatever. We do not want to see Iran acquiring nuclear weapons, and that is the ultimate goal. And I guess going in a way with diplomacy, with then the threat of economic and military sanctions should stay as an option at the background. That would be quite difficult, but clearly that would be a departure from the Trump administration policy towards Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Stein and Dr. Haritos, for your responses. I see that we do have questions in the Q&A box, and I will read the first question. The first question is from Nicholas Bagritis, and he says, I'd like to thank both speakers for their insightful input. I have two questions. The first one is about the relations between Iran and Israel. Do you think that the two countries can make even baby steps towards normalizing their relations in the near future? And the second question is about Trump and Kushner's peace plan. I would just want to tell us a little more about what you think are the positive and negative aspects of the content of the plan.
I'll go on the Iranian issue. I wish that to be the case. Let me make a quick historic digression. Dr. Haritos mentioned in the outset of his remarks, was quoting from our late Prime Minister, the First Lady Golda Meir, and her remarks. It was Israel was, but now less, but was surrounded by Arab countries, hostile, unwilling to recognize the state of Israel, and Israel was looking at the map and asking, where can I find partners? And that led our legendary first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, at the outset to devise what he called the periphery strategy, reaching out to states in the region with which we thought we have a common denominator, and that was the hostility towards the Arab states. And the three countries that he saw as potential partners were Iran, Turkey, and Ethiopia on the African side. And as a matter of fact, Israel had in the years beginning relation with Iran. There was also affluent Jewish community there. Informally, we had the relationship with the Shah in many walks of relationship, economic, military, defense, and whatever. And come the 79, the Khomeini revolution and Khomeini getting into power, Israel has become the declared enemy number 2. The big Satan is the US, and the small Satan is Israel. And it's unfortunate because Iran, compared with Arab countries, is a civilization, has a huge potential. We might have a lot in common, but as long as the mullahs and the ayatollahs with their ideology, it's almost impossible to see any rapprochement between us and Iran any time soon. On the contrary, because we are a declared enemy, the Israelis are afraid that part of the Iranian nuclear program is ultimately aimed at Israel. And Iran, with its policy nowadays, has made Syria into a potential strategic stronghold, trying to have a border with Israel in Syria, and beyond that is helping one of our most difficult enemies, proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon. So altogether, we are now in a kind of a state of war for all practical purposes. And with that agreement, nuclear, I hope that the US and the European will help at least to de-escalate as a first stage. But I mean, from normalization with Iran, we are years apart.
I agree 120% of what Ambassador Stein said about this question. Can I continue about the Trump plan? I have the feeling, I have the feeling that you see that it's nothing good with this plan. So it is true. The good thing that happened with the Trump plan is that it has been the enzyme, the reason, into brackets, to legalize and legitimize the contacts that have been between Israel and the Gulf states for decades, and Israel and Morocco for decades. And if there had not been this plan, then the Abraham Accords would have no reason, no enzyme to come and to become a reality. This is the good result of the Trump peace plan. The bad result of the Trump peace plan is that, yes, those unilateral decisions that the Trump administration made, such as recognizing Israeli presence in the Golan Heights, moving the embassy in Jerusalem, and declaring that the whole part, all of Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, it is something that I feel that the US will, it will be very difficult to change in the future. These are the bad things that the Trump administration has done before and after the peace plan, the vision that it is called as a vision by Trump, so that we can agree. On the other hand, if we see in a theoretic, the theoretic background of what Donald Trump has decided to implement in the Middle East, I have the feeling that in the White House they have thought the decolonization of the Middle East did not bring peace. The formation of independent states did not bring peace. The mandate, the British mandate or the French mandate did not bring peace. Wars did not end up to peace. The Oslo agreements, not even them. What will bring peace in the Middle East? Investments, economy, economic interests. This is what the vision is all about. And we might not like the way that the vision treated the Palestinian cause, but in the whole picture, the fact that this vision brought together the Israelis and the Saudi factor, part of it is the UAE and the Bahrain. It's something very important. And of course, I do believe that the Abraham Accords are something good that has happened in the Middle East. The only good thing that happened in the Middle East during the last 100 years, in my opinion. It is something that it was unexpected. It is something that we could imagine that it might happen in the future, but not like that and not in this way. And let's hope that Biden, I have the feeling that the administration, the new administration in the US, knew exactly what Pompeo was doing the last 3 months, even after the election.
I guarantee you that that was not the case.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Haritos, for responding. And I see that we have more questions in the Q&A box. The next question is anonymous, and it says, in 2020, we have seen Greece approaching more and more some countries of North Africa and West Asia, Egypt, UAE, Israel. Turkey has already significant military bases and activities in Libya, Somalia, Syria. Despite the Turkish challenges in the Aegean, the last summit meeting of the EU imposed mild sanctions to Turkey. Taking into consideration the support of Germany, Italy, and Spain to Turkey, do you believe Greece should look to make stronger allies in Northern Africa?
Dr. Haritos is prepared for you.
It is prepared for me, and it comes from India, I think, this question, because they said in West Asia. The problem with Greece is that they have to decide, Athens has to decide what is its strategy in North Africa and MENA. They have to decide what they want. Athens has to decide what role Greece has to play, or is willing to play or not willing to play in the region. And I have the feeling that they have not, in Athens, they have not decided yet. I think that it was one of the unbelievable moments in the news when I heard the foreign minister of Greece saying that Greek diplomacy was surprised about what the government of Libya and Turkey have agreed or they planned to agree. It is inconceivable for Athens not to know what is happening on the other side of Crete when you are in the southern coasts of Crete and you see Libya with blind eye. And in Athens, they are surprised what Libya is planning to do with Turkey. So I hope that this event might be a good lesson, and that Athens and the government in Greece will decide what its vision of the role in North Africa and in the Middle East, and how Greece will decide to exploit, to promote their interests through this cooperation with Cyprus and Israel, Cyprus and Egypt in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. If they are not willing to decide what they want, they will not succeed. They have to decide what they want.
Let me just make a quick correction as part of the question. The European Union has decided not to impose sanctions at this stage, but to defer it to their meeting in March.
Yes.
I don't want to go into, because Turkey is a huge issue in and of itself. For the Eastern Mediterranean, Dr. Vamvakas, that's the elephant in the room. But recently, I must say, Erdogan is sensing that there is something new coming his way. And he has, first of all, made some positive remarks towards Israel. Turkey has already appointed an ambassador who will at one point present his credentials in Israel. Turkey has made some very positive noises and overture towards the European Union, clearly, that he is willing now to kind of enter kind of a new relationship. He must be said that Chancellor Merkel is leaving the scene, because Merkel has been really somebody who was less antagonist to Turkey within the European Union, as many others were, if I mention only France for that matter. And finally, I guess what he senses is new winds with the incoming Biden administration. And he will not have an easy time. And he has some issues on his agenda, the S-400 that they have bought from Russia. He has now something which he urgently needs, because there's a big military arms deal between Turkey and Pakistan. And the US at this stage is withholding it because the motors, the engines for the helicopters are a US-made product. And he's not likely to get a permission anytime soon. So as recognizing that there is something coming up his way and no longer Donald Trump, Turkey is making some new noises. To what extent will it have its impact on its posture in the Eastern Mediterranean, as we look at the gas, as we look at Libya, as we look, I mean, only in Nagorno-Karabakh, the difficulty that Turkey presented there. So Turkey is really, as I said, part of the problem, but also part of the solution. There is no stability in the Eastern Mediterranean without Turkey. And that is something that we have to, as difficult as it is now for Israel, Greece, and Cyprus, self-evident, but I mean, the European Union will have to play a role. I hope that the US will try and go between with somebody appointed by the administration. To what extent the US will have now time to focus on that sub-region, I also don't know. But I guess the 2021 would be a very promising year in terms of what we might expect or not expect that will happen.
The only thing that I would like to add, yes, there is information in the news and in the reports about the intention of Turkey to appoint again an ambassador in Tel Aviv. I have seen also a certain name with a certain title, non-diplomat. He is a researcher, but if you see the Gazette, the official Gazette of Turkey, this appointment hasn't been yet.
He's slated to become what I said.
It is said that he is going to become. Yes, I have checked the Gazette. There is no appointment.
But don't forget that in the news we could also read about a visit by the chief intelligence of.
Oh yes, yes, and of course this we could not have seen in the Gazette. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, okay.
Thank you.
Oh, Natalie, what's in it?
Thank you, Ambassador Stein and Dr. Haritos, for your responses. And I see that we have one last question before we finish. We kind of addressed it, but I'd like to read it. Good afternoon. Will the signing of the accords increase and diversificate the investment strategies in the Middle East and North Africa, MENA region under the new US administration guidance?
Dr. Haritos, why don't you respond?
I believe that the financial factor, it is something that is going to be, that it was important for the Trump administration, and I think that the same will happen with the Biden administration. I don't see any change. I mean, the Abraham Accords have also an economic context, and this context is going to be the same also with the new administration. I don't see any reason not to be.
Ambassador Stein, would you like to add?
No, thanks. I mean, I'm fine. Yeah, I have nothing to add.
Thank you. So unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers today, Dr. Haritos and Ambassador Stein. We are very grateful for this interesting and insightful presentation and discussion. I would also like to thank our facilitator, Dr. Vamvakas, and thank our audience as well for being here and for asking these great questions. Before ending the presentation, I'd like to remind everyone that we will be having another presentation today later on at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Greek-Turkish parliamentarian debate. Thanks again.
What time Israel time?
No, it's 9 p.m. 9 p.m.
9 p.m. Okay, thank you.
And thank you for being here today with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.